Rina Kovac wasn't on shift. She was buying a birthday present for her niece when the first person collapsed 12 feet away from her, and the mall's own security guard told her to step back and let the professionals handle it. 6 minutes later, those same professionals were about to do the one thing that would kill everyone in that food court faster. Ashworth Commons smelled like cinnamon pretzels and new carpet, the specific overbright cheer of a mall 2 weeks before a holiday. Rina Kovac stood in a toy store aisle, comparing two stuffed foxes, texting her sister a photo to ask which one her niece would actually want and not just politely accept. Her sister texted back almost instantly. "The orange one, obviously. Are you okay? You never come to the mall on a Sunday. Day off." Rina typed, "Actual real day off. Don't get used to it." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Proud of you for taking one. See you Saturday. Love you." Rina smiled at her phone. An easy, unguarded expression that almost never showed up anywhere except in messages to her sister. She hadn't worn scrubs in 19 hours. She'd worked a double the night before, gone home, slept 4 hours, and driven out here anyway because Sunday was the only day she had left before the birthday. And some things, the actual things, not the emergencies, still mattered enough to show up for. For 6 years she'd built a life around exactly that principle. Show up for the small things. Nobody in this mall knew that showing up used to mean something much larger, much heavier, in places whose names she'd stopped saying out loud. She heard the first sound before she understood it. A woman's voice, sharp with confusion rather than pain. Then a chair scraping. Then, from the food court 40 feet away, a man went down hard enough that his tray hit the tile before he did. Rina was moving before she finished setting the fox back on the shelf. By the time she reached the food court, 3 more people were down, a teenage boy convulsing against a table leg, an older woman drooling and disoriented in her chair, a mother clutching her own throat while her toddler screamed beside her, untouched and terrified. A father 2 tables over had gone quiet and gray, staring at his own shaking hands like they belonged to someone else. The smell hit Rina next. Faint and specific. Something under the food court grease that didn't belong there at all. Her stomach dropped before her mind caught up to why. "Everyone back. Please. Give them room," a mall security guard was saying. "Hands out." Voice pitched for crowd control rather than crisis. "It's probably a gas leak. HVAC's been acting up all week." "It's not a gas leak," Rina said. The guard barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please step back and let the paramedics work. I am a medical professional," Rina said. "Look at their pupils. Look at how much they're salivating. That's not carbon monoxide." "Ma'am." The guard's voice hardened. Embarrassed now. Performing authority for the gathering crowd. "I need you to not panic people right now." Someone behind her laughed. Short and nervous. The kind of laugh people make when they need the situation to be smaller than it actually is. Rina felt the heat of it anyway. 20 strangers deciding, in half a second, that the woman with the shopping bag was the problem. Not the 10 people now on the ground. Nobody in that food court knew that 4 years ago. Rina had spent 2 tours identifying exactly this kind of chemical signature for a living. In places where getting the diagnosis wrong didn't just cost time, it cost lives. Sometimes her own teams. She'd traded that life for 12-hour shifts and a quiet apartment. And she'd never once told anyone at work why she sometimes flinched at the smell of certain cleaning products. She knelt beside the convulsing teenager anyway, ignoring the guard completely, and checked his pupils. Pinpoint. Constricted to almost nothing despite the dim food court lighting. Not CO. Never company. 2 more people went down behind her while she was still crouched there, a security guard's own radio crackling with a second call from the far side of the food court. A cashier collapsing mid-sentence at the register. Coffee cup still in her hand as she hit the floor. 9 people now. 10. The number kept climbing every time Rina let herself count it. And some old, Cold part of her mind that she'd tried very hard to retire kept counting anyway. The first paramedic unit arrived 4 minutes later, and Rina felt something in her chest unclench for exactly as long as it took Captain Dana Wexler to open her mouth. CO exposure. Multiple victims. Get everyone on high-flow oxygen and start evac. Wexler called out, already directing her team toward the ceiling vents. HVAC report from last week flagged this system for maintenance. 12 people down now. A grandmother had collapsed near the pretzel stand. Her grandson screaming her name over and over like volume alone could bring her back. It's not carbon monoxide, Rina said, louder this time, stepping directly into Wexler's path. Pinpoint pupils. Excessive salivation. Muscle fasciculations, that's organophosphate poisoning. Oxygen won't fix this. It might not even slow it down. Wexler's eyes flicked over her jeans. A mall shopping bag still looped over one wrist. No badge. No uniform. Nothing that said this stranger had any right to redirect a working scene. And you are? A toxicology nurse. Ridgemont General. Then you know protocol says we treat presumptive CO until proven otherwise. Wexler said, already turning away. I don't have time to argue triage with a civilian in the middle of a mass casualty event. More people were going down now, 6. Then 8. Spreading outward from the food court's center in a pattern Rina recognized instantly and hated recognizing. A contamination radius. Something had been released here. Deliberately. Engineered to spread through the air handling system fast enough to hit dozens of people within minutes of each other. 14. 15. Captain. Rina's voice went flat. The register she hadn't used out loud in 4 years. The one that used to make people listen whether they wanted to or not. If you put high-flow oxygen on an organophosphate victim without atropine first, you accelerate absorption through the airway. You will make this worse, not better. Something in her tone finally landed. Wexler paused. One hand still raised toward her team. Calculating the cost of listening against the cost of being wrong in front of 30 watching civilians with their phones already recording. A paramedic behind her, younger, still fumbling with an oxygen mask, glanced between the two women, waiting to be told which order to follow. Where would you even get atropine for a mall food court? Wexler said, but slower now, less certain. I keep a field kit in my car. Personal habit from a life I don't usually mention. Rina was already moving toward the exit. I need 90 seconds and I need your team to hold everyone off supplemental oxygen until I get back. Wexler didn't say yes. She also didn't say no. Which, in a scene this far outside anyone's training, was as close to trust as Rina was going to get in the next 90 seconds. Rina ran. She hadn't run like that in years, full sprint. Heart slamming. Counting her own steps out of an old habit that never fully left. No matter how many years of quiet shifts she'd tried to bury it under. Rina made it back in 81 seconds, field kit in hand, and knelt beside the convulsing teenager first. Atropine, 1 milligram. She said, pushing the injection into his thigh before anyone could stop her. I need this in every symptomatic patient, starting with the worst. Repeat every 5 minutes until secretions dry up. Wexler hesitated exactly as long as her training told her to, and exactly as briefly as 30 people crumpling to the floor allowed for. Do it, she said to her team. Follow her doses. The next 4 minutes moved the way real emergencies move, not clean, not cinematic. Just fast and ugly and full of decisions made with too little information. Rina moved from patient to patient. Dosing. Checking pupils. Calling out vitals in short-clipped bursts that left no room for anyone to argue with them. Fasciculations easing. Good. Salivation slowing. Good. Toddler's mother. Pupils still pinned, breathing shallow. Not good enough. Second dose. The grandmother by the pretzel stand wasn't responding. Her grandson had stopped screaming her name and started just crying. Quietly. The kind of quiet that scared Rina more than the screaming had. Come on, Rina muttered, pushing a second dose. Come on. A beat. 2. Then a cough. Then the woman's hand found her grandson's arm. Weak but there. And Rina let herself have exactly 1 second of relief before moving to the next patient. She didn't have time to feel any of it. Feeling it would come later, if there was a later. 22 patients treated. 2 still critical. None lost. Not yet. Rina refused to let herself finish that sentence out loud, even in her own head. A second EMS unit arrived mid-treatment, adding 2 more sets of hands to the line of patients still waiting for their first dose. And for a few minutes the food court looked less like a crime scene and more like the kind of controlled chaos Rina had spent years training other people to create out of nothing. Nobody questioned her dosing anymore. Nobody asked who she was. There wasn't time. And results had a way of settling arguments faster than credentials ever could. It was mall security footage, pulled up on a tablet by a supervisor trying to understand what had happened to his building. That gave her the second half of the nightmare. A maintenance contractor, badge clipped, toolbox in hand, had entered the mechanical room adjacent to the food court 11 minutes before the first collapse. He hadn't left. The supervisor's hands were shaking as he scrolled back through the footage. A heavy-set man named Delgado who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. "That's not one of our guys," he said. "I don't recognize him at all." "There," Rina said, tapping the screen. "That's not routine maintenance. That's staging." "Staging what?" Delgado asked. "A release point built into the air handler," Rina said. "Whatever hit this food court came from that room. And if there's a first device, there's very likely a second, a backup trigger. In case the first one got discovered too early." Captain Wexler's face went the particular gray of someone recalculating an already catastrophic scene. "You're telling me there might be another one of these things in my building?" "I'm telling you the man on that screen hasn't left the mechanical room in 11 minutes. Rina said. "And I think that's exactly why." Delgado's radio crackled, a second security team reporting movement near the loading dock. A locked door someone had jimmied open in the last 5 minutes. Wexler's team was still stretched thin across 22 patients. There was nobody left to send. "I'll go," Rina said. "Absolutely not," Wexler said. "You're not law enforcement. You're not even hazmat certified for an active scene. I'm the only person here who knows what that man is actually holding." Rina said. "Call it in. Send everyone you've got. But I'm not standing here counting seconds while he finishes what he started." She was already moving before Wexler could stop her. Adrenaline burning through 19 hours of exhaustion like it had never existed at all. The mechanical room sat behind an unmarked door past the loading dock, humming with the low mechanical breath of a building that had no idea it was under attack. Rina reached it 40 seconds ahead of building security. Because 40 seconds was the difference between a man finishing what he came to do and a man getting caught before he could. He was crouched at the secondary air handler, hands inside an open panel. Wires split and rerouted with the careful economy of someone who'd done this before. He looked up when the door opened. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man doing math about how many seconds he actually had left. "Don't," Rina said. He didn't listen. His hand moved for the panel's trigger switch. Fast, final. Rina crossed the distance before he cleared it. 4 years hadn't erased what her body still remembered: how to close distance before an opponent finished a decision. How to redirect a wrist instead of meeting it head-on. How to use someone's own momentum as the thing that put them on the ground instead of her. His fingers grazed the switch. Didn't reach it. Her forearm drove his arm wide, the switch clattering uselessly against the panel's edge, and momentum carried him face first into the server rack beside it. Hard enough to knock the air out of him. He twisted, tried to drive an elbow back into her ribs. Found only air. She was already past it. Weight dropping. Pinning his arm behind him with a pressure that made further movement a very bad idea. He wasn't done. He bucked hard, twisting his whole body under her, trying to throw her weight off balance the way a much bigger man might have expected to succeed against someone half his size. He didn't know what she used to be. He was learning fast. She adjusted, shifted her knee, and the fight went out of his shoulder all at once. A sharp gasp replacing whatever fight had been left in him. Building security flooded in behind her 30 seconds later. Weapons drawn. Shouting things she barely registered over the sound of her own pulse finally spiking now that the actual danger was over. On the ground, someone was shouting. "Stay down." He stayed down. Rina stepped back, breathing hard. Hands trembling now in the specific way they hadn't while 30 people's lives had depended on them staying steady. She looked at her own hands like they belonged to someone else for a moment. The way they always did right after, steady through the emergency. Shaking only once it was safe enough to finally let them. One of the security guards, the same young man from the loading dock who'd never fired his weapon outside a training range, looked at her like she'd just materialized out of a different movie than the one he thought he'd walked into. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "were you a cop or something?" "Something," Rina said, and didn't have the breath left to explain further. Fire Chief Dale Osgood arrived with the hazmat response team 9 minutes later. Already suited for a chemical scene nobody had briefed him fully on yet. He took one look at the mechanical room. The pinned suspect. The field kit still open on the floor, and one look at Rina. "I know that decon stance," he said slowly. "I trained with a CBRN unit 6 years ago that moved exactly like that. Female specialist. Best chemical threat I ever saw in the field." Everyone called her. "Please don't," Rina said. "Kovac," Osgood said anyway. Something between recognition and disbelief settling into his face. "You're the reason half my unit is still alive after that refinery incident in Bakersfield. I never got your name that night. Just watched you work." Captain Wexler, standing a few feet away with her own hands still faintly unsteady, looked between them like a woman rebuilding the last 20 minutes from a completely different set of facts than the ones she'd walked in with. "You told me you were a toxicology nurse," Wexler said. "I am," Rina said. "That part was never a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either." "No," Rina admitted. "It wasn't." Wexler didn't apologize with a speech. She just held out a hand. The gesture landing somewhere between professional respect and something more personal than that. "You saved this scene. All of it. I want that on record. Exactly as it happened. With your actual name attached." Delgado, the mall supervisor, found her a few minutes later, still visibly shaken, holding his own radio like it was the only solid thing left in the building. 22 people, he said. 22. And every one of them is going to walk out of here. I keep thinking about what today looks like if you'd just gone home with that stuffed fox instead of stopping." Rina didn't have a good answer for that, so she didn't try to give him one. The mother from the food court, toddler now asleep against her shoulder. Both of them stable, both of them breathing easy, found Rina near the ambulance bay 20 minutes later. Tears already falling before she got a single word out. "You didn't know us," she said. "You didn't have to stay." "I did, though," Rina said. "That part was never optional. Not for me." The woman held onto her hand a beat longer than a thank you needed to last. The way people do when words stop being enough to hold what they're actually feeling. An older woman, the grandmother from the pretzel stand, walking now with her grandson's arm looped through hers for support, stopped Rina on her way past, gripping her free hand with surprising strength for someone who'd been unconscious less than an hour earlier. "I don't know your name," the woman said, "but I'm going to light a candle for you tonight." Rina squeezed her hand once and kept walking, because if she stopped to let herself feel every one of these moments individually, she wasn't sure she'd make it out of the building standing. The man in the mechanical room gave up the rest of it within the hour. Once it became clear the evidence wasn't going anywhere and neither was he. He'd been hired through 3 layers of shell contracts by a development firm called Pemberton Group, which had spent 2 years trying to force Ashworth Commons into a fire sale acquisition its owners kept refusing. A mass casualty chemical incident, publicly blamed on negligent HVAC maintenance, would have tanked the property's value overnight, and Pemberton would have been the only buyer left standing when the dust settled. They didn't care who died, Wexler said, reading the confession off a tablet 2 hours later, voice tight with fury at how close her own scene had come to being a mass grave over a real estate transaction. It was never about the mall. It was about the land under it. 22 people, Delgado said again, like the number had lodged somewhere he couldn't dislodge it from. Almost dead, over a zoning valuation. The suspect, a contractor named Grady Milner, it turned out, 3 months behind on a mortgage and apparently willing to overlook exactly how many lives his employer's plan actually put at risk, offered almost nothing else once his lawyer arrived except a single, hollow line that made even the federal agents in the room go quiet. I was told it would just be a scare. Nobody was supposed to actually get hurt. 22 people needed atropine within minutes of exposure to survive today. The lead investigator told him, flat and cold. That is not what a scare looks like. That is not what you were told. Or you didn't ask the question you already knew the answer to. Milner didn't have anything to say back to that. Rina, watching through the observation glass, found she didn't feel much of anything toward him at all. Not hatred. Not pity. Just the particular emptiness that comes from realizing a man had been willing to gamble 24 strangers' lives against a number in someone else's spreadsheet. Rina didn't have much to say to that. Some things didn't get better with commentary attached. Federal investigators arrived by evening, taking statements, photographing the mechanical room, cataloging a device that, according to the agent who briefed Wexler afterward, had been built with more sophistication than most domestic contractors would have had access to on their own. Someone had paid a great deal of money to make sure this looked like an accident. 3 days later, a man in a government badge she recognized on site, Deputy Director Alan Reeve, a name from a life she'd tried hard to leave folded up and put away, sat across from her in a conference room considerably less impressive than the mall's own management office. He had a file open in front of him, thicker than Rina remembered her own service record ever being. He read from it without quite looking at her, the way people do when they already know the answer and are giving the other person room to correct them if they're wrong. Staff Sergeant Rina Kovac, CBRN Specialist. 2 combat deployments. Decorated for the Bakersfield refinery response and at least 2 incidents that remain classified enough that I'm not permitted to say more than that in this room. Separated from service 4 years ago. Honorable discharge, medical and personal reasons. That's the file, Rina said. The file doesn't mention that you spent 4 years hiding inside an badge at Ridgemont General. Reeve said, or that you single-handedly identified and contained a domestic terrorism event that would have killed dozens more people if you'd been 30 seconds slower. I wasn't hiding, Rina said. I was healing. There's a difference, even if it looks the same from the outside. Reeve studied her for a long moment. Full reinstatement, he said, sliding a folder across the table. CBRN response. Field rank restored. A unit that would very much like someone with your specific read on chemical threats back in rotation. Rina thought about the toy store aisle. About 2 stuffed foxes and a text message to her sister that never got sent because a man 3 tours away from ever meeting her had walked into a mechanical room with a wrench and a grudge disguised as a business plan. She thought about the teenage boy's mother saying, "You were the one talking to him the whole time." About the grandmother's hand finding her grandson's arm again after 2 doses of atropine bought her enough time to come back. About 4 years of ordinary shifts that had never once felt like hiding, no matter what anyone's file said about it. No, she said, not full-time, not back in the field permanently. Reeve leaned back, unsurprised. The posture of a man who'd read her file closely enough to expect exactly this answer. Consulting, then. Consulting. Rina agreed. You call me when something like Sunday happens again. I keep my scrubs. I keep my patience. And I sincerely hope you don't call very often. We can work with that. Reeve said. He closed the folder, then paused before standing. For what it's worth, Staff Sergeant, I know exactly how much worse Sunday could have gone. I know, Rina said. I try not to think about the version where I was still in the toy store when the second device went off. Neither of them said anything else about that for a while. Reeve stood to leave, then paused at the door. The unit's putting together an official commendation. Kovac. Classified. Obviously, you won't be able to show it to anyone. And it won't mean much on paper anywhere civilians can see it. But it exists. Some people need to know that. I don't need the paper. Rina said. I just needed the 22 people to make it home. They did, Reeve said. Every one of them. He left the folder on the table anyway, in case she changed her mind. And Rina sat alone in that conference room for a while after he'd gone, looking at the closed cover without opening it again. Chief Osgood found her in the hospital parking lot a week later, off duty, off the clock, holding a small velvet box he'd apparently been carrying around for 3 days, trying to find the right moment to hand it over. Hazmat unit voted on it, he said. Unofficial commendation. Officially. None of this happened. And you were never in that mechanical room. Rina opened it. A small enamel pin. The shape of the same decon symbol her old unit patch used to carry. Engraved along the edge with 3 words she hadn't expected, still showing up. That's not really an award, Osgood said, almost apologetic. It's just what the guys wanted you to know. It's enough, Rina said, and for the first time in 4 years, she meant it completely. Osgood didn't push for more conversation than that. He'd clearly rehearsed this exchange on the drive over and knew better than to draw it out past what she seemed willing to hold. Take care of yourself, Kovac. You too, Chief. She stood alone in the parking lot for a while after he left, pin still in her open palm, and let herself feel, just for a minute, with nobody watching, how tired she actually was. Not the good kind of tired. The kind that sat behind her eyes and didn't fully go away with sleep. The kind 4 years of quiet shifts had almost let her forget existed. Her niece got the Fox that weekend. A week late and slightly worse for wear from riding around in an evidence bag for 2 days. And didn't care even a little bit. Rina sat on the floor of her sister's living room that evening, watching a 6-year-old name a stuffed animal after a superhero neither of them had ever heard of, and let herself feel. Just for an hour. Like someone whose whole life fit inside one uncomplicated room. You were on the news, her sister said quietly, once the birthday girl had run off to show the Fox to her stuffed animal collection. They blurred your face, but I knew it was you. The way you were standing. It wasn't supposed to be a whole thing. Rina said. You almost died in a mall food court and you didn't call me. I called you about the Fox. Her sister didn't laugh, not right away. She just reached over and took Rina's hand. The same way the toddler's mother had at the ambulance bay. The same way people do when the words run out before the feeling does. I know you don't like talking about the old stuff, her sister said finally. But I need you to know I'm glad you're the kind of person who runs toward it instead of away. Even when it terrifies me. Most days it terrifies me too. Rina admitted. I just don't usually have time to notice until afterward. Her sister squeezed her hand once and let it go. And for the rest of that evening, nobody in that living room said another word about mechanical rooms or field kits or government badges. There was cake. There was a 6-year-old explaining, at great length, exactly which powers her new Fox possessed. There was, for one uncomplicated hour, absolutely nothing that needed saving. Rina drove home that night with the window cracked. The cool evening air doing what it always did after a hard shift, clearing something out of her chest that no amount of paperwork ever quite managed to. She still counted the streetlights in 4s out of habit. The same rhythm she'd used 100 times to steady patients who couldn't steady themselves. Old habits, she'd learned a long time ago, didn't retire just because you asked them to. Some of them, it turned out, were exactly the ones worth keeping. Monday morning. Back on shift at Ridgemont General. Rina found a sticky note taped to her locker in her charge nurse's handwriting. We need to talk. Not in trouble, just talk. She stood in front of her own locker for a full minute before opening it, dreading the conversation more than she dreaded anything in the mechanical room 2 days earlier. Being seen had never been the hard part of Sunday. Being known was. The story had made its way through the hospital grapevine by then, stripped of its classified pieces, but intact enough that people's eyes lingered on her a beat too long in the hallway. Nobody said much to her face. She caught the whispers anyway, the way she always caught things she wasn't supposed to. She got through the shift the same way she got through every shift, quietly. Efficiently, giving nobody more of an explanation than the job required. It was harder than it used to be, now that half the building knew there was more to explain. The people who show up quietly, again and again, rarely do it because no one is watching. They do it because somewhere along the way, they decided showing up mattered more than being seen doing it. If someone in your life has been that quiet and steady for longer than you've noticed, maybe tonight's the night you actually tell them.